followed by a discussion relevant to the review of ASA CR6.
Thank you, Chair Boone. Thank you all the trustees and the committee members as well for the opportunity to present today on a productivity model, as you know, you're on director's desk. And what I wanted to do is kind of start out, even before going perhaps to the first slide. Well, let me go to the slide for a moment. Is talk about at least kind of the agenda overall. So when we look at the productivity, and you think about productivity, you know, it all talks about numbers, accountability, and so forth. But I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of two other keywords, so to speak. I know, by the way, I always see there's a commercial, it's like 3 Ps, price, 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 or something like that. I think it's a life insurance thing. Think about these things these days, but regardless, besides productivity, and that is purpose and passion. When you think about all of what we do here, it's because of some original passion. Hopefully we can reignite that, even though we're going to talk a bit about numbers and productivity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about purpose. Obviously, we're doing a lot of this subsequent to House Bill 424. I'll talk about that in a moment. As a reminder, we have an obligation to submit something to the state by January. It's here, obviously, for your consideration in terms of a model. I'll talk about how we got there and a bit about the model, at least at a high level for the most part, and go from there. In terms of some of the concept of purpose, when we think about what we're doing here, and you talk about situations where you could become constrained from a budgetary perspective, the economic realities and so forth, you can go at it in 2 ways. One is you can say, okay, well, where do we trim, where do we cut? The other way is where do we grow, how do we grow? And when you think about a productivity model that's based also and tied with purpose and passion and all of what we do day to day, and we think about the components of purpose, such as educating more students from Kentucky to go out into the world for meaning and purpose. Think about that as a position and a job and a privilege to have every single day. What we do in terms of advancing discovery, many of us have gotten very excited in our careers to discover something or contribute to something that gets amplified to help others in some way, to help economic development, to help business development, and so forth. And more discovery from a faculty member perspective brings up a level of expertise for teaching as well. So when we think about discovery, critically important, incredibly purposeful. When we think about health and well-being, clinical service, for many of our different colleges, you got 7 healthcare related colleges. Think about what we're doing in terms of meaning and purpose there as well. In terms of service to the community, think about extension as one example. And you've heard so many different stories related to that. Many of you, and I think most of you, if not all of you, visited some of those sites recently, as I did as well. What incredible stories in terms of what they're doing, again, in terms of meaning and purpose, and what the faculty are doing there to drive that and feel good about that. And then one additional, when you think about Kentucky's future, not only what we do in terms of our own economic stability and growth, if we look at the growth side of the equation, as I mentioned a moment ago, but what we're doing for Kentucky and economic growth. What we do here is incredibly purposeful. We don't get that without enhancing productivity. Doesn't mean productivity isn't driven by purpose and passion, but nonetheless, we don't get there without that kind of level of productivity. We need to think about it. And I'll add one thing, being a medical doctor, as you know, I try not to relate examples, but in studies, if you actually pay attention to your own level of purpose and productivity in what you do in day-to-day work, it actually leads to greater health, decreased depression, decreased anxiety, so don't lose sight of that. Having a set of goals, and that's what we're going to get to here, is so that every faculty member, could you imagine having a model where by July 1, 2026, and we'll get to this, July 1, 2026, all faculty worked out with metrics that pay attention to the economic stability to fuel the things that they're passionate about, but with metrics that they can do, that are feasible, that can be measured and followed, that they can feel good about growing over time. And we would have that for all faculty, so that we can be working together to help them with their productivity. Okay? And we might be calling it expectation, or exceed expectation, or below expectation. But even knowing that at the college level, knowing that at our office level, I'm going to bring up our Associate Provost for Faculty Advancement a little later in the talk here, because we've got an office to support that. But we really can't support a faculty member that wants to do better, wants to do more, and is passionate about doing more if we don't know about it. This is a way to know about it with transparency, and I think we need to think about that in terms of a model. Key here. And I don't think that happens in the nation. I don't know of another university where there's that level of clarity. We're going to get to that level of clarity. So when you think about purpose, think about all of those things I just mentioned, and then there are many more. But the first one I mentioned is our students feeling good about what we do for that next generation that goes out there and changes the world because of an instructor hitting a key thought in their mind and hitting a key level of passion in them to go out and have more meaning and purpose. So, with that said, I have some examples. There are a lot of numbers here, so I'm going to have to focus in just on a few. Obviously, you have the slides. You can go through them in some level of detail if you want. But I wanted to point out some things that we're challenged with and that we need to pay attention to as we think about and as we develop this model. And I'm going to talk about how we developed it in a moment, but I want to give some examples at the college level, and I want to give examples of faculty. You have the slides there, so you know this slide talks about the colleges, or it's an example of 4 colleges. I don't know the colleges, but most of you could probably figure it out. You might actually slip here and there, so that's probably okay as well. But I'm going to also talk about in the next 2 slides some faculty examples. I'm not going to give every single example, but I want to call out a few things here when you look at it. And actually, I have a pointer. I don't know if that's easier. Yeah, maybe that is. So if you look at DOE, you know, we unfortunately live by DOE to some degree, or totally, so to speak. From a faculty perspective, that's basically the support of salary to cover time for certain areas of mission, instruction, research, service, and so on. And if you look at average DOE, and we're only looking at research and instruction, average DOE in College A, and you look at average DOE in College B, and C, and D, and what do you see? The dark blue is instruction, the light blue is, by the way, we always use blue for good reasons, especially after last night at 11 o'clock. But we have instruction and we have research, and you can see differences. So here's a college more instruction, more instruction oriented. Here's a college more research oriented, and then here's one extremely instruction oriented. Okay, then you see metrics down here, and we worry sometimes about the metrics. What does it mean? We've got to do more. Sorry.
We have a lot of acronyms. Can you explain DOE to everybody?
Sure, absolutely, sure. But I apologize about that. So, distribution of effort. Could look at it as FTE, you know, but it's distribution of effort. So, just to even take a step back to your point, Mr. Chair, which I think is a really good question and important to point out. When you look at any faculty member, because most faculty do multiple missions, okay? They do some research, they do teaching. They do some service. And so when we hire any faculty member, and it might evolve over time, we actually specify the level of distribution of effort for each of those missions. So we would say, and it adds up to 100% of their time, so if you think about it, of their time, that they're going to spend, if they're 50% DOE on research, they're spending 50% of their time on research, and we're covering that amount of salary to make sure that they have the ability to do that. Obviously, there's additional, support in different ways, because it might be supporting also a lab if they're doing research, for example, or other things that they need for supplies for teaching. And then if they were 50% teaching, and granted they usually also have some service and some professional development time, they would have 50% DOE for teaching. It adds up to 100, and then if you look at it as an average across the colleges, that's what we see in the bars across the top here. So, for example, and I'll get to the specifics, the distribution of effort in College A, on the average, they do, on the average, this is all averaged in, all faculty in that college, 43.3% instruction. So the average faculty there, 43.3% of their time is spent on instruction. and we cover that amount of salary for 43.3% of their salary to be able to do that. And in that same college, 33.3% in terms of research time. You go all the way to college D, those faculty spend more of their time. And if you look at their DOE, which is on paper, all DOEs are listed. When faculty get evaluated, it's always relative to their DOE. Those faculty, 62.8% instruction on the average, so more instruction heavy, so to speak, if that makes sense. And yeah, please don't stop me, hesitate to stop me if there are other acronyms or things that come up. Now into the slide, if you look at college A, and you look at that first box, I'm not going to go through all of them, but degrees per faculty. So that's the number of student degrees. There's some language or text underneath. Number of student degrees. Pointer here. Oops. There we go. This is the number of student degrees awarded for full-time faculty equivalent faculty member. So 12.77. Okay. This is college A. We already said that the average distribution of effort for their time in terms of instruction is 43.3%. You flip over to college D, much more instruction time on the average, and then look at that degrees per faculty. It makes sense. Much more instruction heavy. Then if you look at research, college A, you drop down. What this and keep in mind, when we kind of get to the concept of purpose, that means more degrees, more students going out into the world with some degree, and it might be an undergraduate degree, and then they're going to go on to an additional graduate degree as well. So really important in that regard. When you look at, so that's a number that would make at least a correlation to that. If you look at research as a metric, this particular metric is asking what percentage of that distribution of effort is covered by external support, funding that came external from grants of some sort, could be industry grants, could be federal grants or anything, to cover that time to do the research that they're doing. So it's the portion of total research compensation funded by external sources out of the amount of distribution of effort that they have to do research. I don't know if that makes sense. If somebody was 100% research time, and you said, okay, we want to support you, but it's easier to support you and also fund for a lab and the equipment and all that in terms of the budget we have. If you could bring in some external dollars, it adds to what we can do in a university. It adds to what we can do for you and the program. And so if you bring in grants, you actually cover that salary and it supports and makes it more sustainable. But there's some nuance to this here. I'm going to get into that, and that's kind of at least the other main point I wanted to make in this slide. This says 3.6%. You look at college B, it's almost 90%. So what's the difference there? That means in this college, and I'll explain, there is at least a number of explanations, but that means that they're covering on the average only 3.6% of their salary with external support. That means the college, the institution, or dollars are having to come from the institution. We use the term sometimes unfunded research. I think it's a terrible term, but it is institutionally funded research. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but then we need to say, okay, is that something that we should be covering? Because those are dollars that could be used somewhere else if they were to bring in, like this college here, 90% of their research dollars. They're covering their salary, a lot of sustainability there. But then you start asking, how are there these discrepancies there? What does it really mean? And what I can tell you is that in this particular college, without identifying the college, I think you'll figure it out, they value in a very important way. They're a college where they don't typically get external grants. But what they do with that research time is they do research so that they make high impact publications in journals in business. I think I've now already given it away. Business journals that are high impact. And what does it do? It increases reputation. It increases expertise. It makes students more expert when they get taught by those instructors. So you say, wow, and that's explainable, okay, to some degree. But you still might say, okay, out of all of those that we're covering, now you could ask the question, if we're going to create a model, what do we create in terms of the value of, say, those kind of publications? Because if you ask that college and that college dean, so hopefully forgives me for this, he would say, yes, but it's more important for the faculty member, more important for the students, and more important for the institution if they're in that high impact realm, as opposed to a lower impact. And we try to do everything we can to help them do that. Well, you could imagine then the metrics perhaps in that particular individual could include some sort of tier level where you try to seek out and above exceeding expectation would be publishing in those high impact journals, and a lot of them perhaps. Meeting expectation would be at least some of them. And not meeting expectation might be you're not really publishing or you're not publishing in those high impact journals. What it does is create a level of transparency to try to bring everybody up, because we are, as an institution, paying additional dollars to cover the other percentage of distribution of effort of all those faculty in terms of the research arm. Now, maybe also that some of them are doing more instruction and they're contributing here. I'm not judging. We don't know. It might be done perfectly. But what I say is, right now, without an overall model of transparency and having every one of those faculty members have kind of a script of goals based on what they're passionate about, we can't help them and bring them up if they're falling below even what they would want to do. Or, and I know the Faculty Senate, I'll get to it in a minute, was very, I think very clear on this, and I thought it made a lot of sense. You want a feedback loop in terms of distribution of effort, because you know what? We can adjust distribution of effort if it's not working out. So if you have one of those research-heavy faculty, and they're not able to get really those publications, if this is the example we give, and you say, gee, the majority of your distribution of effort is in research for that individual, might be in that individual, maybe we should shift it over to more instruction and figure out how we help you do that as well, so that you could be successful. So I guess what I'm getting at is that, yes, there could be analytics to this, meaning, hey, we're going to tier it out in terms of high impact publications and acknowledge those that are doing that, reward those that are doing that, meeting expectations, and then if that's the tier of not meeting expectations, how do you all surround that faculty member in a transparent way to bring them up? So this is a nuance, and hopefully I was clear enough to explain it, because it's easy to see, hey, this college, very research-oriented, most more light blue in terms of distribution of effort versus instruction, and covering research, but they're able to get those grants to bring them in to cover it. But you still could ask the question, is it even across different individuals? And again, giving a level of transparency will help, not only at the college level, at the faculty level, but then also at a level where we can help more centrally. So I think a level of transparency is key. I think looking at fairness is key. And then I'm just going to get to something that not everybody wants to talk about, but I think is key, is economic realities. Because when you look at now the institution as a whole, it is, I think, important for faculty members to also understand not only can they do what they're passionate about, but they contribute to the sustainability of what we do and the ability to grow. And we've got faculty members, they want to, and you already heard a number of them, they want to create new programs. They're excited about it. We're excited about it. It gives students more opportunities. Again, it gets the purpose and passion. No question, but we've got to sustain it. But as it turns out, for some of these metrics, it actually brings in additional support. Not that we're driven by that, but if we don't have that, we don't have economic stability, if that makes sense. Meaning that obviously the more degrees, and then down here, this is what's called average number of attempted credit hours, again, a measure of volume of instruction. And we don't want just volume, we want quality, of course. So I know sometimes you talk about volume, but it does bring in more tuition, so it allows us to support those students even more. It helps with the economic realities and stability. Same thing with research dollars. If we bring in dollars here to cover, we have dollars to help over here for those journal publications that might be important for reputation and expertise. And we want all that. But the question is, are we getting all that? Is it fair? And how do we do it in a way where we also pay attention to aggregating it across the colleges as a whole? Doesn't mean it has to happen, every one of these things in every college, in every individual, but every individual fits somewhere. And they should have an understanding of where they fit, Obviously, we want them to be able to work towards things that they can control. We get that. But it's important to think about colleges as a whole, because we want more support to grow programs. We want more support to come in externally to do more research. And there's only so many dollars that we have, and we live in constrained times. So when you think about the economic realities of it all, we need to work at it together and also feel good about contributing, not only for what we're passionate about and some of those metrics. I gave you the example of journal publications. The first time I had, I'm going to get into stories. I actually didn't know how I was going to lay out this talk, but the first time as a faculty member, I had an opportunity to publish in New England Journal of Medicine. New England Journal of Medicine, probably the most impactful medical journal. You always aspire to that when you're in training, if you're ever published in New England Journal. I can't tell you how elated I was and how good I felt. Not just because it was a mark, of, hey, this is successful, but because I felt like I would amplify things. I thought I was going to change the world. That's a separate talk, did you change the world with publication? But nonetheless, I felt like I was going to change the world because others could use it and it would amplify things. But I'll tell you, there was no metrics there. My institution, they're great, they were great, there's no question about it. But my institution didn't acknowledge it. I mean, I acknowledged it, I felt good about it, I was passionate about it. But I can tell you, in a model like this, those types of things could be acknowledged. Whatever it may be, whatever, an individual might be passionate about, but obviously it needs to have some sort of analytics to it, some sort of quantitation so that we can identify it, and we're going to get to that in a moment. So anyway, hopefully this complicated slide I tried to explain, but in summary, okay, differences in distribution of effort, differences in colleges in terms of what they do to cover research and sustainability, what they do in terms of instruction, and the balance of that, and the messages that hopefully I tried to make clear, and that is, it will help with transparency, it helps with aggregation across colleges for our own sustainability. It doesn't mean that we worry about sustainability where we're going to have to cut. You can look at the other end of the equation, meaning how do you have support to grow? And I think that's really important to grow the kind of programs that we're all excited about. And as I mentioned earlier, for that main set of purposes that we all came here for. Train and teach more students to go out for lives of meaning and purpose, as the president always says. And I think that's critical, I think we all feel that. So now, and I promise I'll go a little faster through slides. I know these are complicated slides. There are two slides here of different faculty members. So now we get into the faculty. Hopefully I kind of alluded to some of it. I obviously talked about construction metrics, which you saw some there, degrees per faculty, attempted credit hours, those kinds of things. But now you could ask, well, what about other discipline-specific metrics that make sense for faculty? Here we talked about one in terms of journal publications in business, really important, but could be quantitated in certain tiers as well. I mentioned that. Here are some different faculty. I only want to highlight a couple of things here to talk about. Now, in terms of defining distribution of effort, you can see in this particular faculty member, I hope, that they are very heavy on the research end, okay? But then you look down here, not much in terms of external. I say, okay, well, that's really good, and that should be included in their portfolio of things that we would expect, and we work at year after year. And it might be other faculty that have the same distribution of effort that aren't quite there, but they want to do more. How do we help them do more? And I think this level of transparency in this model will help with that as well. And what I wanted to do is then flip over, if you look on the other side, here's a faculty member where there is mainly 76% of the distribution of effort is instruction. And what areas of scholarship, and you can see things that are different here, different than just, say, attempted credit hours and degrees per faculty. So there are other things that should be incorporated per faculty member, and these are the things that would be worked out as well. One of the things that we talk about fairness is in any of these areas, when you come back to, for instance, this faculty member, you could imagine other faculty members that want to aspire to that, or maybe not quite that, but still meeting expectations, but they want to potentially do more. And what we do know is in instruction, that in some of these colleges, even 20% of the faculty are doing more than half. So in this college, 20% of the faculty are doing 65% of the instruction. Now, what does that mean? It might be that Some of those others are doing more research. But having transparency allows us to see that and sort it out amongst the faculty as a whole, as I've talked about. And then the last thing I want to mention on this particular slide is, let's flip over to some other metrics that could be included in terms of discipline-specific metrics. And I'm just going to call attention to faculty B. Totally on board to work toward this, so that July 1, we have something that really is on. I think having clarity alone is going to be important as well. So I'm going to go to the model a little bit here. We've looked at it in three main areas: instruction, research, and service. And again, I'm going to treat this a bit more at a high level. I can't talk about every single detail. And when you look at those three areas, I spent a lot of time already with the examples on instruction and research, and you can imagine examples of service. Extension, for an example. Clinical service is an example. I mentioned before, we have 7 healthcare-related colleges. What did we do to develop this? So we actually started out not that long ago, but understanding that we needed to answer to HB 424 and understanding that we wanted an opportunity to do something that was absolutely amazing in terms of paying attention to a model here that could help with, as I mentioned earlier, what we do in terms of purpose and passion, but also doing it in a way that we have transparency and can acknowledge it, and do it in a way that we actually have the economic stability to grow. We started with the Faculty Senate. So the Faculty Senate worked on this actually very rigorously for a number of weeks, and you can see that listed there. I won't go through every single one, but maybe I'll point out a couple things here. Coming up with some interim reports, some discussion, actually some benchmarking. I think I have a slide coming up that talks about some of the institutions that they benchmark. I can tell you we looked at even many more, working toward a model, and basically consulting, across colleges as well. They came up with, out of the Faculty Senate, what they termed with an acronym, UK FRAME. I now say it's an overall framework, with the acronym, and actually I would say they did a great job in terms of coming up with an acronym. But that was advice to us to then work on it further with the colleges. So we worked with the deans, we worked with their colleges, we worked with their faculty councils and the faculty to come up with additional input to understand how we were going to roll this out, so that we paid attention to some key metrics that made sense for the institution to support what we do, as I mentioned before, in terms of even the economic realities, but then to also pay attention to discipline-specific metrics that made sense for the faculty. We came up with a final report, and I can tell you that there's even been follow-up in the last week. Even though advisory, Faculty Senate, we listened to it. And then even when there was more opportunity to have further discussion, we tried to listen as best possible, and I know there were some modifications you might have seen that we uploaded onto the director's desk, a few modifications. That was again with input and discussion, so hopefully everybody saw that and felt that. And I think what we came out with is a really great product together, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. The next slide talks about the institutions, at least some of them that we benchmarked, or they benchmarked as well. And now I want to talk about some of the principles. This is an overall campus model. Okay? It is an overall model. It is getting at the individual. It's with broad consultation. I mean, consultation, we do what we can. It may not always be perfect, but we try to listen and we try to do everything we can to be sure we're understanding it at the faculty level. Efficiency, positivity. I mentioned before, this is not all about punishment of anybody who's below. It's also figuring out how to bring them up, and it's also acknowledging those that are above expectation. Talked about some of the superstars before. They should feel good about it. We need to come up with acknowledgments in some way or rewards, and that's something we can work out as well. Responsiveness to variation in disciplines, I've talked about that as well. When you look at approach, mandates performance occur on a regular cycle. Right now, colleges do it in different ways on regular performance evals that aren't as transparent and clear as what we're talking about here, but are clear depending on rubrics and depending on the college and the departments. Some of them do it annually, some do it twice a year. What we're proposing here is we do it annually, so there is good feedback each year. So there's consistency across colleges and fairness, but then also at the same time have an opportunity to incorporate some of the things we're doing already. So some of these reviews for merit raises and so forth, Why can't that all be incorporated in one? The deans are totally on board with that, I think. I don't know, raise your hands, deans, if you're back there somewhere. So if you raise your hands, I think we're totally on board with helping with that. Defines how performance will be scored. We wanted to make it simple. So it's basically going to be scored, and roll up into meeting expectations, above expectations, below expectations. But it creates a level of transparency that we all know, and we can get our arms around any faculty member that we need to work towards bringing it up. Outlines a method for reporting from merit results up to the office. I'm going to have Becky come up in a little bit to talk about where we go from here. Provides a system of improvement for faculty members with low performance scores, really key in terms of what I've just talked about. Follows the university's due process regulations as well. And then if you look at some more specifics, and I won't go through every one of these, productivity aggregated across colleges. Doesn't mean that we're going to hold faculty accountable in terms of things that they can control and work toward, but we need to understand, and they should understand in a transparent way, where they fit in their college and where the colleges fit across. Otherwise, we're not going to have the support we need to continue to grow and to support the programs that we are all passionate about for the purposes we talked about, training more students, doing more services. Define college and individual metrics, we talked about that, but again, the college metrics to help with benchmarking for individual metrics and transparency, how they fit. Annual performance reviews for the reasons that I mentioned. Clearly defined productivity expectations. This clearly defined piece, I think, is really important. If you look across this whole campus and you ask faculty, do they really understand what it takes to get promoted, to get merit on a regular basis in some objective way? I think you would hear a lot of variability in terms of those responses. I hear that. Because you imagine clarity across the whole campus, and that's what we're going to work towards so that that occurs. Fairness and consistency, we talked about reviews and metrics that are cognizant of the economic realities. We want to be able to have the support we need to grow more research, to grow more programs. Tiered system to make it simple for the most part. A reward or acknowledgement system for those exceeding expectations. I think people should feel good about it. And one of the things that was important to the input I got from our faculty trustees and the faculty senate was evaluation based on statements of evidence. Our departments have already in statements of evidence, they're not all as metric driven as they can be in statements of evidence, but they are identifying things that are discipline specific and important for a particular department or educational unit. It's used mainly for promotion, and there's no reason why it shouldn't align with what we're talking about here. One full system, and done in a fair and equitable manner. Obviously paying attention to distribution of effort. We talked a lot about that a little while ago. And these distribution of effort is signed by the chair and the dean. That's our system. Regular feedback should be given. And I mentioned an example earlier. A faculty member that could be struggling in terms of research grants, and it could be because of external constraints. Certain grants aren't just distributed as much anymore. We're in tough times right now. But how do you help them look at a potential shift in DOE to do more construction or something that would be important to them and purpose and for all the things we just talked about. So I thought it was important. The model is here. This could look confusing. I'm just going to try to simplify it. And then after this slide, I'm going to have Becky come up a little bit to talk about where we go from here in the model, because we've talked about college level metrics. Actually, we try to pay attention to things that are easily measured and things that we can measure even centrally and make it even easier. And these are metrics that we can measure, and we measure now under a model we already had called the productivity model, or CPM. So right now, these are measured for colleges, and as colleges do more, teach more, and also do more in terms of research, so think about the college slide, we actually give funds back to the college in a financial allocation model. So having faculty members acknowledge where they fit in to help with that in some way, obviously the things that they can control, is really important because it's giving colleges back the fuel, the funds, to support the growth of the things that the faculty are doing, creating new programs, doing more research. So it is really important to acknowledge this and be sure, but one of the things we talked about with our faculty trustees and the faculty senate is, can we put in something that talks about that the individuals are scored by their individual individual metrics. So here are some individual metrics that are at a high level, can be measured, and then obviously there'll be some additional metrics that relate to disciplinary differences. So you have college level metrics in terms of transparency and benchmarking, can be measured, already being measured, and important because as faculty fit in and help with that contribution in some way or another, and everyone does something different, and it's not every faculty, but we got to think about it aggregated as a whole, we have more support to get back to the colleges, to get back to the faculty in terms of the programs they do, which is going to result in the purpose we talked about before in terms of training more students, more service, and so forth. And then individual faculty clarifying metrics, and then the statement here put in, metrics will be put into the distribution of effort for appropriate weighting. Yes, an instructor that's only doing 20% instruction in their department distribution of effort compared to an instructor that's doing 80%, we would expect some differences. And depending on the discipline, we might expect some cases, small classes. We understand that. But there should be clarity. There should be clarity that on July 1st, 2026, there's clarity on a piece of paper for each faculty member. Knowing what they're doing, they're passionate about. Most of them, we're not passionate about everything we do, but hopefully passionate about most of what they're doing, and at least have clear goals that relate to what they do and contribute as a whole, but what they can control in terms of what they're doing themselves. Obviously, the research also in a similar way, and I even put in here the publication example I gave in the College of Business and Service. There are a number of examples, extension, clinical, and so forth, and you could think of so many others. So let me just say, without now getting into the detail, zoom out for a moment. We're talking about instruction metrics, research metrics, and service metrics. We're talking about incorporating what we already do in some colleges annually already, performance reviews. We're talking about getting to the point, and Becky's going to hit on this, of getting it to roll up to basically a tiered system where we can say meeting expectation, exceeding expectation, or not meeting expectation. And she'll talk about it, and then working to help those that are not meeting expectation to try to bring them up. That can be the approach. Now, will it work and all? It may not work and all, but hopefully it will, and hopefully everyone will be passionate to step up and take on that challenge. Because as I mentioned earlier, there are economic realities. As I also mentioned earlier, we can look at it on the kind of the negative side of the equation, meaning, oh my goodness, if we don't do it, we're not going to have enough funds, we're going to have to cut things. No, if we do it and we team up, and even look at it as an aggregate across all colleges, we each do our part, we're going to actually have more support to do the things that we're passionate about and the things that have purpose for our students and for the services that we do. So I'm going to, actually maybe I'll go back, and I'm going to have Becky come up. So Becky, just as a reminder, so Becky was hired here from another institution that we stole her from, with a lot of experience related to faculty growth, and models that are analogous to this. She is our Associate Provost for Faculty Advancement. I have committed, and she's committed, that our office will help oversee this to make sure that this goes in the right direction, working with the colleges. The deans have already committed. We're going to be meeting with chairs as well, and make sure that we roll this out really well. Obviously, the model will be put in if you all agree. It's obviously here for your consideration, but if this passes and goes forward, it'll go into the state, but then we have work to do. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to speak a little bit, and then I'll be here, and she'll be here to answer questions.
Thank you, Provost Capella, Chair Boone, members of the committee and the board. It's a pleasure to be here today and to share some further outcomes of our work together. On this slide, I will just add a little bit of context. We have, as Provost Capella referred to, already a process in place by which each academic department has statements of evidence that outline what kind of evidence we want to see of faculty productivity. Those are developed at the department level because of the variation that happens. Looking, for example, under teaching, we see that there are differences between teaching undergraduate and graduate classes. Those will have different levels of sophistication, different sizes. Similarly, teaching a writing intensive class. That will be a class that's going to be capped at a fairly small size because there's so much intensive feedback that has to be given to help students as they develop their writing. So we will be attentive to those disciplinary differences and to those differences within disciplines as well. And again, those existing statements of evidence that we have in the departments will give us a great starting point. So, a lot of the work that will be happening with the faculty productivity model will start in the departments and roll up to the colleges and then roll up to the provost office. Particularly, those statements of evidence, those disciplinary specific measures will start in the departments. The chairs will then work with the faculty to do evaluation. Different departments have different ways that they think about that. They may have a 5-point scale, they may have a different kind of rubric. But after an evaluation has happened, the performance rating will be converted to this simple 3-point scale. Faculty may exceed expectations, they may meet expectations, or they may not meet expectations. The dean's office within each college will make sure that all faculty are reviewed. They'll collect all of those. They'll flag for us faculty who receive a does not meet expectations rating. And with those, we will implement a remediation improvement plan with an appropriate amount of time to remediate and a process that will develop in consultation with our shared governance bodies for supporting those faculty, as Provost DePaula said. We're figuring out how we can support them. It may be an adjustment to the distribution of effort. It may also be some additional support in a particular aspect of their work that needs some growth, perhaps an assigned mentor, perhaps a workshop that they can attempt to improve. The dean's office will also periodically improve the unit review processes to make sure that there's fairness, that there's consistency, and that we're aligned with our policies. Colleges will also make sure that their expectations are aligned, as they should be, with the unit standards, with the statements of evidence that are publicly available, so there's clarity and transparency about what those look like. And finally, the happy part will be that we'll have opportunities for additional recognition for those faculty who are rated as exceeds expectations. So let me talk a little bit about the timeline for the work going forward. As Provost DePaula said, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Today, the board will be considering our proposal. If you should approve and if the state accepts the proposal, then in the first quarter of 2026, we will do a lot of intensive work to figure out the metrics, the criteria that we will be using within each college and within each department. We need to make sure that those are clear and transparent. We need to make sure they're equitable across the board. So we will work with the deans, the chairs, the faculty councils, and the faculty to make sure that appropriate standards are brought forward. Those will all be submitted to the provost's office for further review so that we can make sure we have equitability across the university as well, and transparency and alignment with our missions. So in the first quarter, those will be developed. We will have then the month of April to review at the provost level, make sure that we have the dialogue we may need to have with some of the colleges and departments. And by May 1st, we will be able to clearly state to each faculty member, here are the expectations. Here are the standards against which will be measured moving forward. Implementation then will start on July 1st. So in the 2026-2027 academic year, all faculty will know ahead of time what the expectations are. They will have that year to perform. And the following year, in 27 and 28, they will have their first annual review based on this new model. My office will be here to support the chairs, the deans, the faculty throughout this process, throughout the development, throughout the execution. We will help plan the process, and we will track the success of this model as it goes forward. With that, Provost DePaula and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So, go to the next slide here. I think it comes up to the recommendation in terms of the ASACR. Let me just, if I could, Chairman, just close by saying, so what you've heard is a model developed with a lot of input going back and forth, faculty input through the faculty senate, and even some discussions more recently where we worked together for even some modifications and clarity. As you heard from Dr. Thomas, we have work to do to be sure to implement this on July 1, 2026. We're up for the challenge. And I just want to end by saying I started out with 3 Ps. we need to, and I encourage the faculty, so speaking to the faculty, yes, this is a productivity model, we're gonna work together to make sure that this is implemented, but don't lose sight of passion and purpose while we're doing what we do every single day. I even cited an article in terms of it's gonna help your own mental health. So thank you all, thank you for the opportunity to present. I'll turn it back to you, Chair Boone.
Thank you very much, Provost Paula and Associate Provost Thomas. The recommendation is that this Board of Trustees approve the UK Frame Feedback and Responsive Allocation Metrics and Evaluation Faculty Productivity Evaluation Structure to take effect July 1st, 2026, with the faculty being informed January 1st, 2026. I think I said that right. Yes. By way of background, the Kentucky's General Assembly passed legislation in the spring of 2025 requiring evaluation of the performance and productivity of faculty members at least once every 4 years. House Bill 424, amended KRS 164.23, using a centralized review process under the authority of colleges and/or the university president. The legislation states that the evaluation process shall be established by the board and provided to all faculty members by January 1st, 2026, to become effective July 1st, 2026. The Faculty Senate, in its advisory capacity, was engaged by the provost to develop faculty productivity review models for consideration that are transparent, encourage professional development, ensure accountability, and reward excellence. One of the recommended models provides the basis of UK Frame, which has been further developed with additional consultation. The Provost of the university supports this recommendation, and I will entertain a motion with respect to ASA CR6. Trustee Wilson, is there a second? Trustee Lucas, any discussion? Trustee Swanson.
I appreciate the responsiveness of the provost to many of the concerns that the faculty have brought forth. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to be engaged in the process as it moves forward. Perhaps what I'd like to suggest is that given the House bill says that the board should have oversight of the policy, that we should have some kind of feedback at our meeting.
Thank you very much, Trustee Swanson. Any other discussion? Trustee Petro.
Yes, I really want to thank Provost DePaula and the whole team for the responsiveness and the engagement with this process. And I do look forward to working very closely with the Faculty Senate, other shared governance bodies, and the Provost Office in the next 6 months, because as they say, the devil is in the details. And I want to just kind of underscore a couple of the values that are about the passion. And that is that as this process goes forward, it's really important to keep in mind that some of the metrics, the more numerical metrics, are maybe not capturing, that they may not capture everything, and that we have to be really attentive to not just the numbers, but to qualitative measures, and also to be aware of what measures faculty members have control over versus what measures they don't. If they're assigned to teach a certain class, they don't have control over that. Right, so just to be, as we go forward, to be thinking really carefully about these metrics, to make them fair, to make them consistent, but also to take into account the wide variability of faculty jobs, and to be aware of this qualitative aspect as well. And so I would very much second what Holly Swanson said, Trustee Swanson said, about coming back to you all with a report on how this is unfolding as we work together on the details.
Thank you very much, Trustee Petro. Any other discussion? We have a first and a second. All those in favor, please say so by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. ASA CR6 is approved. Next on the agenda is first